All right, we'll go ahead and go live. So this is Chris Berry with Castle Wealth Group, certified financial planner, certified elder law attorney. And we do these weekly wisdom webinars almost every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, where I just go ahead and log in and answer questions either submitted ahead of time or submitted on the actual webinar. And we always start with positive focus, just something positive that's happened over the last week or so. And a big positive focus for us at the firm is we're moving. So this first week of February, we are, tomorrow, we're kind of packing everything else up, and we will be in our new office, our main office in Brighton, about 2 miles down the road from where we're at now. So pretty exciting. Kind of closed on a building. We're going to be in half of it and then taking over the other half over next year or so. So we're pretty excited about that. All of our contact information, everything else remains the same. We'll just have a different mailing address if you visit us at one of our satellite offices. And then our main office in Brighton will be moving just down the street. So we're pretty excited about that. We've been kind of looking for the right spot for the last 3-4 years to make it more of our permanent home. We've been where we're at for maybe 8 years now. So we're pretty excited about that. So all right, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We had a couple questions submitted already. And if you do have a question that or something's unclear that we're talking about, feel free to put it into the Q&A. And with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. And I gotta hit a couple buttons to make that happen. All right. There we go. All right. And if you do have questions, feel free to go to 15chris.com and you can book some time on the calendar to see how this applies to your information. So this first question, really, I think it's a response to an email we just sent out. What are defined outcome ETFs, buffered ETFs, and why may they make sense as part of our or your portfolio? So here's why these have been becoming really interesting for a lot of our clients right now. The big concern a lot of people have is continued kind of market volatility, right? Markets are going up, they're going down. We had a big drop last year, everyone saw. You're trying to figure out what the Feds are doing with interest rates. A lot of the tech stocks have been hit pretty hard. Bonds are down, so everyone's wondering, like, where can I put at least some portion of our portfolio? And that's where these defined outcome ETFs or buffered ETFs, and there's kind of different versions of these, but really big picture, here's how it works. Let's say we put in $100,000, okay? And it follows, let's say, the S&P 500. Most people have heard of the S&P 500, pretty common index. And then what happens is that we have some type of defined outcome. So let's say 13 months down the line, okay? So ideally we leave this money in for over a year. Otherwise we have to worry about things like short-term capital gains, which shows up as income. But what it does is it builds in this downside protection where, let's say the buffer is 15%, okay? And let's say that what happens is the market goes down, the S&P 500 drops 10%, okay? But because it's within the buffer, you would still, less fees, still have your $100,000 because it's within that buffer of 15%. Now, of course, there's a trade-off for this, and that trade-off would be a cap. And depending on the tool, depending on the month, depending on the timing, and I'm just making up numbers right now, but let's say there's a 15% cap. Okay, so we have a 15% buffer, 15% cap, meaning that if, let's say, the markets go up 10%, you'd be walking away with $110,000 less fees. Okay? Now, if the market goes up 20%, you would be capped at that 115,000 or that 15%. Okay, so that's where the cap comes into play. Now, let's say the markets go down 20%. That's over the buffer. You would only lose 5%. And so you'd be walking away, if the markets drop 20%, you'd be walking away with 95,000. So what makes these tools interesting is that you have this buffer aspect to it, where, all right, we've had the drop last year, the big drop. As long as we don't have another devastating drop, and even if we do, we're limiting the downside. But still, you could have a 15% cap. Like you could make up to 15%. So realistically, you're looking at anywhere from 0, if the market drops anywhere from 0 to 15%, to a 15% gain. I'm not saying everyone should put all of their money into something like this, but given the market volatility, and then also looking at this maybe as a bond alternative. And this isn't like a fixed index annuity, or it's not based on insurance or anything like that. It's just tracking a ETF or an investment and building in some downside protection. And this takes different forms. One version is what's called buffered ETFs, where you have this buffer. So that's one example of a tool that kind of works this way. Another tool that works this way is structured notes. Okay. And all of these can be inside of your investment portfolio. Like we use, our main custodian is TD Ameritrade. You could track how this is doing at TD Ameritrade if we're working together. So buffered ETFs, structured notes, and then also these can be inside of trusts as well, which can be kind of interesting. So these could also be what's called investment trusts. But all of these really kind of work the same way. It's just different ways to get to the same outcome of building in some downside protection, but still getting relatively good opportunities for growth. And especially, we think things are going to come back, but looking at the next year or so, chances are we might have some continued volatility. Here's a question. When the buffer is calculated at month end, year end, or other. Yeah, so what we're doing is we're looking at a defined outcome over a period of time, okay? So a lot of times these might be based on over a year, just because we don't want those gains to show up as income, short-term capital gains. We don't want it taxed at income tax rates. Instead, if we want these gains, especially if it's a post-tax account, we want it taxed at long-term capital gains on any gains. So it might be a 13-month time period where, okay, you put in your money today, and then we look 13 months out to see where we're at. And you can pull the trigger earlier if you wanted to. So you could pull money out prior to this. So don't think it's like automatically locked in. With some of the structured notes, it is locked in. So you do have some liquidity issues with the structured notes, where you wouldn't want to pull the trigger until you get to year or month 13. But like buffered ETFs, those are liquid. So if you change your mind the next day, you could always reposition the funds somewhere else. But typically what you're doing is you're looking at this defined term. So it's also a nice alternative to things like T-bills that a lot of people are doing right now, where you look at the markets and a lot of people think things are going to be sideways. Well, T-bills might get you 4.5%. But if the market goes up, we could be looking at potentially a 15% upside with very little downside. Because a lot of people look at it as, unless there's some type of other black swan type event, we've already had the dip. So it's probably going to be a little bit volatile coming back up. But this is a way that we can build in some downside protection with the buffer and still get a pretty darn good rate of return. And again, this is a market-based product, so it fits right into your portfolio. A lot of people are looking at this as a bond alternative. And if this is something that's of interest to you, I do have some additional information I can share. I can email over some just guides from some of our providers that work in this area. So here's something talks about just kind of how it works, how you have your cap and you have your buffer against downside protection. This is a buffered ETF offered by a company called Allianz. Another one by M Funds. This is through a trust, and this is where you have a capped return of 15%. This one has a 25% buffer. It's following the Spider S&P 500, so you could follow it. And again, if the world is strongly positive, the S&P goes up 20%, you're capped at the 15%, goes up 10%, you get the 10%, goes down 25%, you would lose nothing, goes down 30%, you would lose 5%. So it's a way to smooth things out. Again, I wouldn't look at putting all of your money into something like this, but it is a resource or a different option that not everyone's really aware of. It is a little more complicated than obviously just bond funds along with your equity fund. But I think with the opportunities, it can provide some great options. Here's a question coming in. What are the risks? Really, the risks are what's stated. There's no gotchas with this. There's no what is the risk? Like in this situation with this one that offers a capped 15% return, 25% buffer, the risk is if it drops 30%, you're going to lose 5%. So it's not automatic, like actual 100% principal protection that maybe like a fixed index annuity can offer. But what are the chances we're going to have another 25% drop? I think, don't quote me on this, but looking over the last like 30 years, if you look year to date, we've only had 3 drops greater than 20%, if I'm not mistaken. So the chance of that happening again, it's pretty slim. But I guess the risk is that, understand it, it's not 100% principal protection. It's creating a buffer. And then again, typically to maximize this, you want to go for at least what the period is. Like in this example, the maturity date is 4/30/2024. You can get out of this at any time, but it may be down a little bit depending on when you get out. So the idea is that you want to wait at least to the maturity date. So this is really more for your soon bucket or later bucket of money. It's not money you think you're going to need over the next 6 months. That's where we could look at some short-term T-bills or something like that. Here, let me share another screen. And if this is of interest to you, just reply back to the email and I can send you some more information. We can even set up a call to go over whether it makes sense for you. So here's just some information on structured notes. Again, it's a similar concept here. With some of these structured notes, we could have, say, a 10% buffer. So if the market drops 10%, you're protected against the downside. And then we can even double the participation rate with a max cap of 20%. So in this situation, we have a 10% hard buffer, meaning if we're anywhere from 0 to 10, you're not losing anything. If the S&P goes up, say 5%, you get 2 times that with a cap of 20%. I guess another downside is there's a little bit more of an expense ratio on things like this. But again, with the buffer and the caps of 15, 20% on some of these, it may make sense, especially as that bond alternative, and especially as we look at the volatility over the next year or so. Risk of funds becoming insolvent from mass withdrawals. Yeah, so I guess there would be a little bit of a concern if everyone pulled the funds at once. More so on the structured note side of things. But if you look at a lot of these structured notes, the companies offering them are your bigger banks where, yeah, there is a chance that the bank issuing this could go under. So some of the, like, these are offered by some of the structured note side of things. They're offered by like Citibank and Goldman Sachs. And so again, there's no guarantees in the world. But yeah, I would look at it as really not much more risk than having it in the market. It's just another option to have it in the market, where you can participate in the upside without having to just building in some peace of mind against the downside. So concerned about market volatility, still want the liquidity, want to see how things are in, say, a year. Some of these buffered ETFs or defined outcome ETF options where they come out as structured notes or just a buffered ETF or unit investment trust. These might make sense as part of your portfolio. So we've just, especially given the craziness over the last year, we see a lot of clients who are gravitating towards this as an option. All right. So let me see, any other questions on that? No. Okay. All right, let me go back to question number 2. Share my screen again. All right. So do I need a self-canceling installment note? So this question came in, someone saw like something on Facebook or something like that, that was talking about how self-canceling installment notes are a great estate planning tool. And what I would say is, yes, they are a tool, but what I would say is that for majority of people, they're not a necessary tool. So really, what a self-canceling installment note is, really the big reasons why you would look at something like this, and basically what you're doing is you're just selling assets to family members. One would be if you have a lot of capital gains, or you have, well, the big reason is to do this, or for this to make sense, to add this level of complexity, you have to have an estate tax issue. Okay. Because right now, you have a step up in basis on for anything that has capital gains. So if you leave this to the next generation, they don't have to pay. Like if you bought something for 100,000 and then date of death, it's valued at $1 million, and then the kids sell it for 1.5 million. They don't have to pay the tax on what you bought it at because they get step up in basis at death. So with capital gains, you don't really have to worry about that much because you get the step up upon death. Now you have to die for that, but that's not a big concern. So really where this comes into play is if you have estate tax issues. And so right now, if you have more than $12 million single or $24 million married, then you have an estate tax issue. And then you may want to consider things like self-canceling installment notes, where basically what you're doing with this is you're taking appreciated assets, putting them into this note, and then your kids kind of buy the note at a discount. And that discount might be, I don't know, like 10%. And so now you've lowered the value of the assets inside of the notes by 10%. So it lowers your estate tax. So a lot of times this is more like business owners, large pieces of real estate. I'll tell you, we have not, just with the way our practice is set up, we have not had the need to do any self-canceling installment notes. Like, it sounds fancy, and when I've had conversations with some, like, especially as I was starting out, like I met like a lot of financial advisors and CPAs, and they always throw out these things like all these like estate planning acronyms, like self-canceling installment notes, grantor retained annuity trusts, grantor retained income trusts, and even irrevocable life insurance trusts. Like, it's like acronym or alphabet soup with these different strategies. And really, for a majority of people, these are just coming out of estate tax issues. Okay. And the way our practice is set up, we don't have many clients who fall into this 12 million single, 24 million married. Now, it used to be different. It used to be down at like this 12 million used to be as low as 600,000 way back in the day. But with the estate tax continuing to grow, some of these estate tax planning strategies just kind of have fallen by the wayside because we don't need to use them because we have this huge estate tax exemption. So that's a self-canceling installment note. I'll tell you what, we've never had the need to do one. When I started my practice about 16 years ago, I think the estate tax exemption was for a married couple at like 3 million, and then it was at 6, and then 10 and 12. It just, nature of my practice hasn't caused me to ever have to utilize any of those. So, all right. Moving on to the last question that was submitted. So if you do have any legal, financial, or tax questions other than what I've covered, feel free to put it in the Q&A. But otherwise, I'll dig into this last one right now. All right. So the last question I have here is, with the pour over will and trust, is anything required from the executor to close the account? All right. So what this is happening is when someone passes away, what needs to happen? And the biggest thing, document number one, is we're going to need a death certificate. Okay, multiple death certificates. And typically this is going to come from directly the county, but in reality, who's going to get this is the funeral home. And typically what they're going to do is they're going to get you typically 10 death certificates. I'd recommend, for the number of counts you have, get that number, or number of financial institutions, get that number of death certificates. If you need more, you can always go to the county to get more. I forget exactly how much they cost. It might be like $14 per death certificate. But you're going to need a handful of original death certificates. So that's the first thing. And then, so that shows that you've passed away. And then the second thing the financial institutions are going to need to know is who do they have, who has legal authority to now act? And that's where we come into play. And so, especially with a trust, typically what we have to do is a new certificate of trust. Okay? So when we draft your documents, you have a certificate of trust saying that you're the trustee, that you're in charge. You're the one that created the trust, and here's the name of the trust. Well, once you pass away, we need to do a new certificate of trust showing that the successor trustee is now the acting trustee. We can't do that until that person is actually acting. And then also, typically what we do is we have them sign an acceptance form, acceptance of the role of the trustee. So that's saying that now your successor trustee accepts the role to serve. And then the certificate of trust is a document that gives them the authority to work with the financial institutions along with the death certificate to then be able to close out accounts or make distributions or pay bills. And then sometimes we also might need a tax ID number. Okay. You can get this from the IRS, but for our clients, when they lose a loved one, just give us a call and we have a package. We'll put all of these together for you real quick. We can turn this around typically within a day or so, depending on the IRS, to get you all that information so that then you can start working on the accounts. But the big thing is going to be working with the funeral home to get the death certificates. Typically that takes anywhere from 7 to 10 days. Okay. And then all of this stuff, this just takes us a day to do. And if you let us know that a loved one has passed away, we can have this done during that time period. We don't have to wait for that death certificate. So simple call to our office and we can get that certificate of trust, acceptance of trustee, and tax ID put together. And then with this, with the certificate of trust and the death certificate, that will give, and sometimes the tax ID, that will give you all the, I guess, ammunition that you need to be able to work with the financial accounts. So, so that typically be the only thing required. Yes. Yep. All right. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay. Looks like I am done. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Make